Welcome to another episode of Fill in the Blank podcast. I'm here with Corey.
Yo,
So we're here talking about the Ravensbrück concentration camp. What comes to your mind when I say the Ravensbrück concentration camp? And I'm not talking about the football team, the Baltimore Ravens, and a camp where they train at. I am talking about Ravensbrück and a concentration camp.
I guess all I could tell you is what comes to mind when you think of a concentration camp. So probably something to do with either the Jews in World War II World War One, or
Government experimentation?
possibly,
Possibly.
or just any other type of concentration camp where we're detaining certain groups of people.
Well, Ravensbrück was a German concentration camp exclusively for women from 1939 to 1945. Located in northern Germany, 90 kilometers or 56 miles for Americans, north of Berlin, at the site near the village of Ravensbrück, which is known as the part of Fürstenberg-Havel. The largest single national group consisted of 40,000 Polish women. Others included 26,000 Jewish women from various countries, 18,800 Russian, 8,000 French, and 1,000 Dutch. More than 80% were political prisoners. Many slave labor prisoners were employed by Siemens and Halsk from 1942 to 1945. Medical experiments to test the effectiveness of sulfamides were undertaken. In the spring of 1941, the SS established a small adjacent camp for make inmates who built and managed the camp's gas chambers in 1944. Of some 130,000 female prisoners who passed through the Ravensbrück concentration camp, about 50,000 of them perished. Some 2,200 were killed in the gas chambers, and 15,000 survived until liberation. So 130,000 female prisoners passed through the Ravensbrück concentration camp. 50,000 of them perished, 2,200 were killed in gas chambers, and 15,000 survived until liberation.
It's just
What do you think about the Nazis?
great question right after you say all that, you know.
Well, Henry Ford was for Nazis, so
Fucking Henry Ford. It's just,
he makes great cars, sir.
yeah.
The whole idea, though, that how can you torture people and put them in a concentration camp just because they don't look or they're not your idea of what a master race of Nazi eugenics has to be?
Dude, it's just nuts. And it's like, we're gonna get into that all over again once we get into the more, biotechnology and the more the more advanced we're gonna get with this. It's just gonna be crazy. People are gonna enforce it. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
if your DNA isn't Chinese, you're gonna die. Or if your DNA, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Do you think that this is a little bit harsher to kind of hear because it's women getting tortured and put in camps separately and killed rather than men? When you see men as more like, it seems like it has less of an impact of effect. It's still pretty horrifying, but it's definitely less of an impact than if you hear about all women getting.
so this one is just women.
This is an all women prison camp. So this is 55,000 women, or 50,000 of them perished, 2,000 were killed in gas chambers, and 15,000 survived out of 130,000 that have passed through the camp.
What's just like, what's going through their heads too? Each one of those, each one of the Nazis' heads when they're killing all these women.
It also goes to the concept, you got to look at it from the other side too. Maybe some of them felt like they had to do this because their families' lives would be at stake. Like a lot of countries, or
Right,
you don't follow your leader's words or anything, you get torn as like a traitor.
Or they're just so brainwashed that they believe the ideology and they're thinking that they're doing good. Because that's how, honestly, it's how, a lot of, poor or bad religions, I would say, work. And, I think it's crazy that humans can be so
Willing to harm another under
For
the
sure.
word of authority.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the prisoners. Construction of the camp began in November 1938 by the order of the SS leader Heinrich Himmler and was unusual in that it intended exclusively to hold female inmates. Ravensbrück first housed prisoners in May 1939 when the SS moved 900 women from the Lichtenberg concentration camp in Saxony. 8 months after the start of World War II, and the camp's maximum capacity was already exceeded, it underwent major expansion following the invasion of Poland. By the summer of 1941, with the launch of Operation Barbarossa, an estimated total of 5,000 women were imprisoned, who were fed gradually decreasing hunger rations. By the end of 1942, the inmate population of Ravensbrück had grown to about 10,000.
Wow.
Between 1939 and 1945, some 130,000 to 132,000 female prisoners passed through the Ravensbrück camp system. Around 40,000 were Polish and 26,000 were Jewish from all countries including Germany. 18,000 Russian, 8,000 French, and 1,000 Dutch. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, about 50,000 of them perished from disease, starvation, overwork, and despair. Some 2,200 were killed in the gas chambers. Only 15,000 of the total survived until liberation, and on the 29th to 30th of April 1945, some 3,500 prisoners were still alive in the main camp. During the first year of their stay in the camp, from August 1940 to August 1941, roughly 47 women died. During the last year of the camp's existence, about 80 inmates died each day from disease or famine-related causes. Although the inmates came from every country in German-occupied Europe, the largest single national group in the camp were Polish. In the spring of 1941, the SS authorities established a small men's camp adjacent to the main camp. The male inmates built and managed the gas chambers for the camp in 1944. There were children in the camp as well. At first they arrived with mothers who were Romania or Jews incarcerated in the camp or were born into imprisoned women. There were few children early on, including a few Czech children from Lidice in July 1942. Later, the children in the camp represented almost all nations of Europe occupied by Germany. Between April and October 1944, their number increased considerably, consisting of two groups. One group was composed of Romani children with their mothers or sisters brought into the camp after the Romani camp in Auschwitz-Birkenau was closed. The other group considered, or mostly children, were brought with Polish mothers sent to Ravensbrück after the collapse of Warsaw Uprising of 1944. Most of the children died of starvation. It's when you think about, oh, that was back then, it's like we're still having starving kids dying in Africa today too because they can't get the proper nutrients they need to keep their body sustained.
I'm not even thinking about that. That wasn't even that long ago. People are, still alive from that time. Like, it's just mind-boggling how horrible we can be
To each other.
I just looked at, typed in Jewish concentration camps because I actually forgot about World War One between World War Two. But it said 1.1 million people died. Jews were killed in Auschwitz. Just in Auschwitz. That's like, what is the total number? Like,
if you were a Jew put in a concentration camp, either separated from your family or forced to work to death, you ever seen The Boy in the Striped Pajamas?
no, but I want to now.
It's a very, very good movie. You know what the basis of it is?
No.
It's like a kid's outside this fence, and he sees another kid that's a Jew that's locked in a concentration camp, and they just meet by this fence every day and just talk to each other. Not really words are said, but they just look at each other. It's weird. It strikes a lot of emotion and stuff. It's a very emotional, moving movie. And one day the kid comes over and waits for the other kid inside the concentration camp. He never shows up, and he died in gas chambers. And it was just like, holy crap! Like, it's hard to think like two people can be the exact same age, have the same exact innocence, and live two completely different lives. We experience that. Everybody experiences that with somebody, and just to think like there's a person our own age right now that is in a whole other country dealing with a whole other variety of problems that we'll never know the concept of just because we got lucky with what our either race is, what our skin color is, what our abilities are, and where we're at. Yeah.
Like, our problems, dude, are like Oh,
are minuscule to some of
oh
the other
my
problems
word!
out in
It's
the
like, oh,
world.
I didn't get this certain type of food from the grocery
Oh
store.
my God, they didn't have the extra shot of espresso in
Right?
my coffee.
Yeah.
The machine was
This
down.
isn't the right type of caramel. Like those are literally some of our problems on day to day basis. Ours being,
Hell, we had a
it's
problem
just
recently with Facebook and everybody was freaking out. I'm like, what about all the
God,
people in
yeah.
Africa that don't know where their next meal's coming from?
Yeah, what about those kids? You see those pictures of kids like that are like little skeletons drinking out of mud puddle water. It's like, are you like, how can this even be happening? And like that's just another aspect of like what is going on with humanity. What is it about us that is like so fucked up? And
Well,
if we were able to isolate that somehow, is it right or wrong to remove that? Because it's like,
it's the whole idea that we're able to. A lot of that has to do with torture experiments and type of medical experiments that are unethical or against human laws, like the Geneva Convention and all that, and types of concentration camps. They focus on a type of race or type of person that does not look like the person that's performing the experiments. It's the whole concept that you can do something to somebody as long as they don't look similar to you. If they look different from you, like a different race, say a white person torturing an Asian person or an Asian person torturing a white person, they don't look like you, so it brings the whole normalization of torture in. You're able to chalk it up to, well, since they're not similar to us. It's the same reason why we're so like fond with genetically testing animals for types of makeups and types of drugs, because they're not closely related to us in our minds. Even though we talk about how we come from chimps, we're actually more closely related to pigs. That's why a lot of times when we get transplants, we're able to use pig valves and these
mm-hmm,
types of things because they're more genetically made up closer to us than monkeys are.
yeah.
But the whole idea is that we evolved from monkeys, but we're able to test on animals because of just the idea that they're not anything close to where we're at intellectually and how we look. The similarities in our
Yeah,
looks.
we're less connected to them than if we were doing these experiments on people, unless you're a Nazi.
I mean, it's seen throughout history. Looks have always divided us, but it shouldn't matter whether based on skin color or anything like that. We're all people. We
But
need to start accepting that. But the
but
whole
this is
idea,
like gassing women, gas chambers. Can you imagine being like so brainwashed that you are literally just lining up? Probably, I'm guessing they're gassing them naked or whatever, or regardless if they aren't, whatever. Like just just packing defenseless women as a more stronger man or whatever and guns into this thing and then just dragging all these dead bodies out. Like what the fuck?
so the number of inmates were 130,000 to 132,000, and the number killed actually ranged from 45,000 to 50,000 to 117,000. All those countless lives lost. Hitler, they said he had over 6 million Jews killed or something out of the total of time he was reigning. And it's really difficult to think. We whenever you think of someone that's evil or the most evil, you always chalk them up to that he's the next Hitler, he's the next whatever. It's like it's crazy to think that one person is now like the stereotypical devil, like literally, like you're going to say somebody is bad or the worst type of person that humanity has offered. They literally chalk it up to a person's name. So, Ravensbrück had 70 subcamps used for slave labor that were spread across an area from the Baltic Sea to Bavaria. Among the thousands executed at Ravensbrück were four members of the British World War II Organization Special Operations Executives, Denise Bloch, Cecily Liefert, Lillian Rolfe, and Violet Szabo. Other victims included the Roman Catholic nun Elise Rivet, Elizabeth de Rothschild, the only member of the Rothschilds family to die in the Holocaust, Russian Orthodox nun Saint Maria Skobotstva, the 25-year-old French Princess Anne de Barmouft Courtenay Milena Janeski, lover of Franz Kafka, and Olga Benaria, wife of the Brazilian communist leader Luis Carlos Prestes. The largest single group of women executed at the camp were 200 young Polish members of the Home of Army. So among the survivors of Ravensbrück was Author Corrie ten Boom, arrested with her family for harboring Jews in their home in Harlem. The Netherlands, she documented her ordeal alongside her sister Betsy ten Boom in her book The Hiding Place, which was eventually produced as a motion picture. Polish Countess Carolina Lanczkowska, in an art form used the Michelangelo in Ravensbrück, was imprisoned there from 1943 until 1945. Aline Nira, a special operations executive, was a prisoner in 1944 before being transferred to another work camp occupying near Ravensbrück. Ravensbrück survivors who wrote memoirs about their experiences included Gemma LaGuardia Cluck, sister of New York Mayor Fiora LaGuardia, as well as the Germaine Thillian, a Ravensbrück survivor from France who published her own eyewitness account of the camp in 1975. Approximately 500 women from Ravensbrück were transferred to Dachau, where they were assigned as laborers and the Ofka Commando. The women assembled ignition timing devices for bombs, artillery ammunition, and V-1 and V-2 rockets. So the whole idea that you're in this concentration camp, not only being tortured, but also being forced to work for them and create their own mass weapons of destruction that could be used to kill your own fellow prisoners. Isn't that ridiculous?
Yes.
It's literally like saying dig your own grave. So, a male political prisoner, Gustav Noss, stayed in Ravensbrück concentration camp after his arrest by the Gestapo in 1944. Later, Noss was freed by advancing Allied troops from Gestapo prison in Berlin. So here are some of the guards, some of these sick people that worked in the camp. Camp commandants included SS Startdanführer Gunther Tomschke from May 1939 to August 1939, SS Kampfführer Max Kogel from 1940 till August 1942, and I'm not even going to say that last one. Besides the male Nazi administrators, the camp staff included over 150 female SS guards assigned to oversee the prisoners at some point during the camp's operational period.
How many female?
150. So Ravensbrück also served as a training camp for over 4,000 female overseers. The technical term for a female guard in the Nazi camp was Eichpförden. The woman either stayed in the camp or eventually served in other camps. Some of these women went on to serve as chief wardess in other camps. Several dozen block overseers, accompanied by dogs, SS men, and whips, oversaw the prisoners in their living quarters in Ravensbrück. At roll call and during food distribution, at any single time, a report overseer handled the role. I just read. Yeah. At any point, a report overseer handled the roll calls and general discipline of the internees. Rosal Loschkinger originally served as head of labor pool at the camp, along with her assistant Gertrude Schobinger. In 1944, Greta Basel took over the command. Other high-ranking SS women included Crystal Janowski, Elise Goretz, Margaret Dreschel, and Elizabeth Kammer.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to ever need to know those names.
I'm sorry, I'm just reading what the
No,
facts
I
were
gotcha.
down. Well,
You ever see Schindler's List?
I've never seen Schindler's List, surprisingly. Is that with Morgan Freeman?
No.
No.
It's really intense, and but yeah, it's about like this German. What's the word? Like, industrialist. Like he like owns a factory or something, and he like, even though he's part of the Nazis, he helps save a bunch of Jews. But the movie's just super intense. Just gets really gritty and stuff.
Well, Eifried Muller, an SS, one of the guards at the camp, actually had a nickname from the prisoners, and the prisoners nicknamed her the Beast of Ravensbrück based on her brutal torture methods and also forms of getting them to work harder. It seems like a lot of these female guards, even though you're looking like, hey, you're a female too, why are you hurting these female prisoners that are technically like
You.
basically you? Yeah, like they're more closely related than the guys hurting the girls, but they were actually into it more than the guys were. And was that just a chalk up of fear or trying to fit in with the guy crowd that they were serving under? Or maybe they just felt like these women were weak and they had to prove themselves.
Or these women were the most brainwashed.
It's just it's difficult to think that in 1973 the United States government extradited Hermine Broschner for trial in Germany for war crimes. In 2006, the United States government expelled Eifrick Ringel, an 84-year-old woman who had resided in San Francisco since 1959. It was discovered that she had been a guard at Ravensbrück from 1944 to 1945. The fact that they're not getting punished for their crimes based on their age is a little bit ridiculous. It's the same thing people talk about with Bill Cosby, where they think he might have gotten off a little bit easy just because he's older. Like, not giving him life in prison, but giving him, like, a certain amount of years because he might not have that much time left. It's a little bit ridiculous. I mean, you're torturing people at a camp. You would think that you would be punished for your crimes no matter what your age is. You have to pay for your desserts somehow, and how do you wish to pay for this? Even if it's been years later, and you might have changed your ways, you still can't just forgive those sins.
Right.
So, let's talk about the camp a little bit. When a new prisoner arrived at Ravensbrück, she was required to wear a color-coded triangle that identified her by category with a letter sewn within the triangle indicating the prisoner's nationality. For example, Polish women wore red triangles denoting a political prisoner with a letter P. Polish women became the largest national component at the camp. Soviet prisoners of war and German and Austrian communists wore red triangles. Common criminals wore green triangles, and Jehovah's Witnesses were labeled with lavender triangles. Prostitutes, Romania homosexuals, and women who refused to marry were lumped together with black triangles. Jewish women wore yellow triangles, but sometimes, unlike the other prisoners, they wore a second triangle for the other categories. For example, quite often in Ravensbrück, racial pollution. So,
Wow.
if you're of multiple different things, you get multiple triangles. This is not like a sticker for doing a good job. You don't get multiple stickers, golden stickers. You get...
These are racist stickers that you have to wear.
It's like Operation Paperclip, when we just clipped files to people, and that's how we got the government name for the operation. We just clipped files to the Nazis that had the biggest resumes. Like, it's ridiculous. Some detainees had their heads shaved. Such as these from the Czechoslovakia and Poland, but other transports did not. In 1943, for instance, a group of Norwegian women came into the camp. They were ranked by the Nazis as purest of all Aryans, and none had their heads shaved. Between 1942 and 1943, almost all Jewish women from the Ravensbrück camp were sent to Auschwitz in several transports, following Nazi policy to make Germany cleansed of Jews. Based on the Nazis' incomplete transport list, documenting 25,028 names of women sent by Nazis to the camp, is estimated that the Ravensbrück prisoner population's ethnic structure comprised Polish people 24.9%, Germans 19.9%, Jewish people 15.1%, Russian people 15%, French people 7.3%, Romanian 5.4%, and other 12.4%. The Gestapo further categorized the inmates as political, 83%, antisocial, 12%, criminal, 2%, and Jehovah's Witnesses, 1.11%.
Antisocial.
So let's talk about racial defilement, 0.78%, other 0.20%. The list is one of the most important documents preserved in the last moments of the camp operation by members of the Polish Underground Girls Guide Unit Murray, also known as the Walls. The rest of the camp documents were burned by escaping SS overseers in the pits of the crematorium. If you literally have to burn documents on what you were doing, it's probably not ethical, good, moral shit.
Well, right, and we know this already because they're gassing them.
But the whole idea that, like, oh, we got to burn all this information we just researched and conducted, so all these things that we did are literally completely worthless. If they didn't have any meaning before, they definitely don't have any meaning now.
Right. No point in even doing the whole thing in the first place.
One form of resistance was the secret education programs organized by prisoners for their fellow inmates. All national groups had some sort of program. The most extensive were among Polish women, wherein various high school level classes were taught by experienced teachers. So the idea that these prisoners have to do a secret type of teaching program to help educate, and still trying to get an education while being tortured every single day. I don't know. If I'm getting tortured, I'm probably not going to want to go to school.
Man.
They just tried to make it seem like it was important that they still kind of felt normal and try to live a normal life even though they're stuck in this position they can't get out of.
It's hard for me to fathom all of it.
In 1939 and 1940, camp living conditions were acceptable. Laundry and bed linen were changed regularly and the food was adequate. Although in the first winter of 1939 to 1940, limitations began to be noticeable. The German communist Margaret Bulber-Neumann came to Ravensbrück as an inmate after nearly 2 years in a Russian-Soviet gulag. She described her first impressions of Ravensbrück in comparison to the Soviet camp in Karaganda. I looked across the great square and could not believe my eyes. It was surrounded by manicured lawns, covered by flower beds on which bloomed bright red flowers. A wide street which led to a large open area was flanked by 2 rows of wooden barracks. On both sides stood rows of young trees, and along the roadside ran straight flower beds as far as the eye could see. The square and the streets seemed freshly raked. To the left, towards the side of the camp, I saw a white wooden barrack, and beside it was a large block, the size of a birdhouse, like you would see at the zoo. Within it paraded peacocks, and on climbing tree dangled monkeys, and a parrot with always screamed the same word, Mama. I wondered, this is a concentration camp? Bulber Newman wrote her first meal in Ravensbrück exceeded her expectations when she was served sweet porridge with dried fruit, plus a generous portion of bread, mandarin, and sausage. So the whole idea that the camp towards the end of its years actually got a little bit better in living conditions. You might think that might have been chalked up to the whole idea that even though the camp,
I thought they're increasingly starved.
yeah, well that was in the beginning. It seemed to progress, but now we're ending the last year of the camp. So now the camp is actually getting better conditions because the prisoners had developed programs to actually benefit themselves, like kind of adapt to their situation in a way, be able to create more comfortability in a place that they're really not comfortable in. It's like making it feel as home as possible. That's their whole idea. And this lady came from a Russian camp. So she's coming from a whole other camp where it seemed like this is a better move. Like, when you move from a crappy neighborhood to a slightly better neighborhood, but it's still crappy, you see some important stuff like, oh, this is better than before, even though some people are like, this place sucks. So let's talk about some of the Nazi medical experiments. Starting in the summer of 1942, medical experiments were conducted without consent on 86 women. 74 of them were Polish inmates. 2 types of experiments were conducted on the Polish political prisoners. The first type tested the efficiency of sulfonamide drugs. These experiments involved deliberately cutting into the infecting of leg bones and muscles with virulent bacteria, cutting nerves, introducing substances like pieces of wood or glass into tissues, and fracturing bones. The second set of experiments studied bone, muscle, and nerve regeneration and the possibility of transplanting bones from one person to another. Out of the 74 Polish victims, or they called them rabbits by the experimenters, 5 died as a result of the experiments. 6 with unhealed wounds were executed, and with assistance from other inmates, the rest survived with permanent physical damage. 4 such survivors was Jadwiga Dezito, Maria Problater, Władysława Karwowska, and Mara Kumsker.
Not only are you an experiment, but if you don't work as an experiment, they'll just kill you.
Well, the survivors that were permanently physically damaged testified against Nazi doctors at the doctors' trials in 1946. But the whole idea that you're transplanting bones from one person to another, probably not using any type of anesthesia to help this person get through it, just being able to try and... Imagine me taking your femur out and trying to replace it with a different femur.
That's literally what I was thinking of.
Between 120 and 140 Romania women were sterilized in the camp in January 1945. All had been deceived into signing the consent form, having been told by the camp overseers that the German authorities would release them if they complied. Let's talk about some of the forced labor acts. All inmates were required to do heavy labor ranging from strenuous outdoor jobs to building the V-2 rocket parts for Siemens. The SS also built several factories near Ravensbrück for the production of textiles and electrical components. The women forced to work at Ravensbrück concentration camp industries used their skills in sewing and their access to the factory to make soldiers' socks. They purposely adjusted the machines to make the fabric thin at the heel and the toes, causing the sock to wear prematurely at those places where the German soldiers marched. This gave the soldiers sore feet. Yes, that good old passive aggressive way of getting back at the Germans without getting caught. I'm going to make your socks a little bit thin on the heel and toes so when you're walking it's going to hurt. Cause them to get holes in them. Because you're feeding me dog shit and putting me in chambers. For the women in the camp, it was important to retain some of their dignity and sense of humanity. Therefore, they made necklaces, bracelets, and other personal items like small dolls and books as keepsakes. These personal effects were of great importance to the women, and many of them risked their lives to keep these possessions. Some of these types of effects can be seen at the exhibition of Voices from Ravensbrück, hosted by Lund University Library in Sweden. The bodies of those killed in the camp were cremated in the nearby Ravensbrück crematorium until 1943, when SS authorities constructed a crematorium at a site near the camp prison. The whole idea that I'm tired of hauling all these bodies over to this crematorium, let me build one closer.
Seriously, that's insanity.
I mean, what's your opinion on this so far? Are you fascinated that we can do this, that the human race can do this to another human race?
I don't know, fascinated, more or less like horrified.
I'm not really surprised.
I'm not surprised. I already knew that we were doing this. I'm just saying, like, this is what we're this is the subject that we're talking about. So on this specific subject, Ravensbrück or whatever, like, it's horrific. It's terrible.
Not just Ravensbrück, it's just concentration camps in general.
Right, right.
The idea that we can demean a person's life just because on the basis of their religion and how they look and not being the type of race you want them to be or type of look you want them to be is a little bit ridiculous. And you can see that in modern times today.
Yeah.
We're not doing it to this severe types of lengths, but
I mean,
objective racism. You know, we choose to be racist and demean someone else's looks or someone else's value because of the way they are or the way they've been grown up or the way they were given at birth. Like,
but we do have like concentration camps happening. China is doing that with the I can't remember the actual name. It starts with a U, I think, but it's a group of like Muslim type people in the west of China, and they're like putting them into concentration camps and like making them believe certain things and forcing them to do certain things. And I know that they're like being beaten and stuff. I don't know if it's much more than that, but there is definitely still like racism and the whole like religious violence going on. Even, like, I'm thinking about like Africa, like there's tons of slaughters still happening, like, constantly.
Well, in January 1945, the SS also transformed a hut near the crematorium into a gas chamber where the Germans gassed several thousand prisoners before the camp's liberation in April 1945. And particularly, they killed about 3,600 prisoners from the Uschmark police camp for deviant girls and women, which was taken under the control of the Ravensbrück SS at the start of 1945. Now, there was a death march in liberation. In January 1945, prior to the liberation of the remaining camp survivors, an estimated 45,000 female prisoners and over 5,000 male prisoners remained at Ravensbrück, including children and those transported from satellite camps only for gassing, which is being performed in haste. So the idea that we got to hurry up and gas the rest of these people. We got 20 more to go. Well, with the Soviet Red Army's rapid approach in the spring of 1945, the SS leadership decided to remove as many prisoners as they could in order to avoid leaving live witnesses behind who could testify as to what had occurred in the camp. At the end of March, the SS ordered all physically capable women to form a column and exit the camp in the direction of North Mecklenburg, forcing over 24,500 prisoners on a death march. Some 2,500 ethnic German prisoners remaining were released, and 500 women were handed to officials over to the Swedish and Danish Red Cross shortly after their evacuation.
Holy smokes, dude! How many died from that death march?
Though they said they sent 24,500 prisoners on a death march.
And then how many made it?
2,500 ethnic German prisoners were released, and 500 women were handed over to the officials at the Swedish Danish Red Cross.
So does that mean 21
Well,
or 22,000 women died?
on the 30th of April 1945, fewer than 3,500 malnourished and sickly prisoners were discovered alive at the camp when it was liberated by the Red Army.
But the ones that were forced to march, the 24,000.
We don't know what happened to them.
So most likely 21,000 women died from a death march.
2,500.
No, I thought.
No, 24,500.
Minus the survivors, which is
The 2,500 and
so we're at like 21,000, 22 something. That's nuts.
it's crazy to think, man. The survivors of the death march were liberated in the following hours by a Russian scout unit. So let's talk about the Ravensbrück trials. Finally, these doctors and all these people that were in charge of this camp were finally put on trial. The SS guards, female guards, and former prisoner functionaries with administrative positions at the camp were arrested at the end of the war by the Allies and tried at the Ravensbrück trials from 1946 to 1948. 16 of the accused were found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity and sentenced to death.
How many?
16.
60.
16.
Teen.
Well, that's all that were guilty. And then we also have a memorial site. On the site of the former concentration camp, there is a memorial today. In the 1954, the sculptor Will Lamont commissioned to design the memorial site between the crematorium, the camp wall, and Skravetsky Lake up to his death in 1957. The artist created a large number of sculpted models of women. For the inaugural opening of the National Memorial Site, a scaled-up version of Timegrad, Woman with the Burden, was created under the supervision of Fritz Kramer and exhibited. This central symbolic figure, also known as the Pita of Ravensbrück, stands atop a stele on the peninsula in Lake Skravetsky. The Two Women Standing monument also has its origins in Lammert's models. Other statues were also originally created for Ravensbrück, have been on display at the Old Jewish Cemetery in Berlin since 1985, in commemoration of the Jewish victims of fascism. So the idea that at least they have a memorial built, but is it? I think it's a good thing that we have a memorial built at the concentration camp, because you don't want to forget the past. So many times when we think about World War I and World War II, they're all like, let's move on past that. That was in the past. That wasn't us. Yes, that's true, but you can't forget our history.
If you forget your history, then we repeat the same mistakes.
And it's something that society falls victim to every single day. We're constantly making our own same mistakes over and over again. If we look, the mistakes we're making now, we have done back in the day. The best predictor of the future is the past. Mm-hmm. You know, it's difficult when you look at something so harsh as a concentration camp. It's hard not to think that this isn't going to happen later down the road. You know, it's gonna happen again.
Right.
It might be as bad as this. There might be a next Hitler. There might be.
Learn from it, and it's not even learning from it. There's a deeper problem. There's a deeper problem in us, and all I can hear right now is my parents saying yes, and they need Jesus, and it's like.
Do you think Hitler needed Jesus, or maybe he just needed?
He needed Jesus.
He needed a good spanking, I think. Hitler's his guy that actually trained him, his master or whatever, he was an apprentice under somebody, was actually fired him because he was scared. After a year of working with him, he realized the evil this person had, the potential. And I'm like, just to think that you're teaching somebody your methods of madness, and now he's becoming too crazy for you. It's like when you get a pit bull and you decide this pit bull's a little bit too scary or too jumpy or sketchy for me. It's like, what?
Yep.
You can't chalk up Hitler to a pit bull, but you can't chalk up everything he did to just being an act of war. This is a straight up crime against humanity.
It's a monster.
It's the reason why we have rules called human ethics and all this stuff, mm-hmm. to deal with people like this that tried doing something just because they could.
Isn't that the Geneva Convention stuff? Or is
mm-hmm.
that different?
The Geneva Convention is the law of human ethics, like code.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you're not allowed to torture people without
Right, and
certain
no one
things.
listens to any of it.
Well, it's the whole idea of what do you want to chalk up to war and what do you want to chalk up to
To
research.
barbarism.
Yeah. I mean, if we can get more research out of something, they can always kind of sway bend the rules a little bit. I had to because we had to get this research before someone else did. Well, anybody that wants to look up the Ravensbrück concentration camps, they have some actual powerful images on there of strong women holding up other women and children. It just showing a lot of really stature and courage for probably what these women were facing, especially in the times of like this peril.
I can't imagine the strength, the fortitude within these women to bear through, even not getting through it and being killed at the very end. Like, I can't imagine the strength and fortitude that they had.
Well, you say you
Could
can't
you?
imagine what these women can do. I can't imagine what anybody would do in this position.
Right, but since we're talking about Ravensbrück, it's specifically women. And it's like, in this time, women still don't have a lot of, rights, I guess. You know what I'm saying by that? It's like there's
They're not
still.
really still seen as equal.
Right, exactly. So they're already placed in that respect. And, like, so they're even more. I don't know. Like there's less strength within themselves. You know what I'm saying?
They're a little bit more demoralized, I think.
Right.
It's tough and it's a tough pill to swallow, but it happens. So there's something that you get out of educating yourself on it, and whether you don't want to look into these bad topics because
They must have been so scared.
yeah, man. I mean, it's not fun. Probably being put in a concentration camp and being starved to death, or just being having the fear that one day you might not be here because you're gonna get walked into a gas chamber on false hopes that you're gonna get out of a camp.
Yeah, we sit here saying, our problem is dinner's 2 hours late and we're hungry. It's like, shit. Everything we just talked about.
Or the whole idea that you don't have anything in the house to eat,
Absolute
but you have
fear.
keys in your car, you have keys in your hand, you have the ability to drive down the street to the store. Why don't you just go get yourself some food? There's some people that are in a camp right now that haven't eaten in weeks and don't have an ability to go get food.
Right.
They're literally looking for little bugs and stuff on the ground to try and eat because they're starving. Have you ever been to a point of starving before? It does not feel good. Your stomach feels like it's literally eating itself. Imagine being like that for weeks and weeks on end.
Right. Plus, like, women getting popped in the head or tortured or, oh, some new experiment has been done on them, like, all around you. You're just like, I'm next. Tomorrow's today's my last day, and it's going to be some horrific thing. Oh, my God.
Imagine being forced to work in a factory producing weapons
Right.
after your arm has just been transferred from one arm to another person's arm.
And you're like, is this gun that I'm making gonna be the one that kills me?
Mm. That's an impactful thought right there. Knowing that the weapon you have could kill one of your prisoner friends or
Yeah.
kill you.
Yeah.
Knowing that this gun that you're making is just going to harm another person's life down the road. So anybody that wants to look up this depressing article, please do. It's a good read to get a little bit of history information. You probably can make a better interpretation of it than I can.
Yeah, like, don't make a concentration camp.
Yeah, well, I think that's the overall moral thing to do is not make a concentration camp and also treat thy neighbor the way thou would want to be treated. Thanks for listening to this episode of Fill in the Blank Podcast and stay tuned for the next episode.